Welcome to the Set to Lead podcast, the online mentoring platform for emerging and current leaders. My name is Marianne Samdi, leadership coach and talent development expert, and I will be your host.
Hi, Steve.
Yeah, hi, Marianne. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good today. I appreciate you joining the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be
here. Excuse me?
I said it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you. The podcast today is about some of the missing links to great sales, and I know that you're the perfect expert to talk about what folks need to do to get their sales up to par. But before we start jumping into questions, could you share a little bit about your background in sales?
Yeah, of course. I'd be delighted to. It's quite a long background, so I won't go through every single step of the way. I've had 30 years in sales, and I've seen a lot of change over that time, and I think some of that we'll talk about through this podcast. But actually, the majority of my time has always been in corporate sales, and 23 years of those were with Shell International. So I've had quite a sort of global experience with that company. It's a fantastic company. And they gave me the opportunity to lead sales teams in my home country, the UK, but also overseas in Africa. I led a sales team in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I was responsible for sub-Sahara Africa. So that was a real difference about culture and so on. And then out of that, yeah, it really was quite fascinating. And then out of that, I did a good job, and I was asked to go and help Shell design a standard of selling across the Shell world, which meant being accountable for all things like process, recognition, remuneration, coaching for about 2,500 salespeople over 40 countries. And that's where I really got very deep into some of the process elements of Shell, and where I learned very much that behaviors were very much part of success. And I left Shell after 30 years, and I set my own sales consultancy up, which is novelly titled Steve Knapp Sales, to actually bring a lot of my experience to small, medium sized companies that don't have the resources to be able to invest in that sales capability and sales expertise that maybe the bigger corporates can. So that's a quick step through my background.
Wow, extensive. Thank you for sharing that with our listeners. We both know that a critical component to having a great sales team is how you hire your dream team. I was wondering, what type of characteristics do you think are important for a hiring manager to look for when they're hiring a new sales rep, especially one who's recently graduated from school?
Yeah, that's a good question, because if I'd answered that question 10 years ago, how I might have answered it would have probably been a little bit different. And I think that's because of the rapid change that we've seen in technology, in buyers' behaviors, and actually just in terms of how connected things like data is to the profession of sales. So what I've seen more and more from my perspective, and the characteristics that I would always advocate people look out for, actually is a far more analytical individual than in the past. Somebody that is very curious about the prospects, the customers, the industry they work in, an insatiable curiosity, because that probably leads to one of the most important things in sales now, is that they're able to provide insight to prospects and customers versus just products and solutions. They're a self-learner, so somebody that really dedicates their own self-development and learning, which is a bit different to maybe how it was 10 years ago. A couple of others, that they're a networker. They network not only in their own business, but they network in their industries. They network in breakfast network meetings, lunch network meetings, and are really known in the area that they operate. And I think the last one, and this is probably the biggest change, they're very active in social media. They actually have a social media presence. They know how to use social media to promote their brand, to promote their company, to promote themselves. So I would say those are the kind of attributes, characteristics that they have, different to how it would have been 10 years ago, but really important right now in the world we are today.
Interesting list. Especially, I thought, your traits of someone who's analytical and curious. Interesting. How do you go about attracting these types of sales folks to your teams? Is there anything special a company can do to attract these type of sales folks?
I think this is a responsibility that sales companies now have to just accept, that attracting sales professionals and making your company different isn't no longer just about compensation, right? That's one piece of the puzzle. But to attract not only seasoned professionals, but to attract these kind of new quality of sales professionals coming through, a company has got to provide continual development. Yeah, it's got to provide access to that and access to training. Even though the individuals that you might attract stay longer in companies than they ever used to, but you still have to offer it as part of your employee value proposition. I think you have to now really accentuate the diversity and different perspectives you bring. So I come from a European background, and one of the challenges we had was our sales forces were predominantly male, predominantly of a certain age and of a certain colour. And that meant that the diversity was very low. What I've seen over the years is companies be far more aggressive in attracting different perspectives. This in turn attracts a higher quality of individual. And then the third one that comes to my mind here, Marianne, is one around external accreditation. So whilst I work with you as a sales professional and I'm developing and I'm getting all these different perspectives, how do you give me some kind of accreditation that's recognized in my industry? And this starts to become really important in attracting sales folks. If they move from sector to sector or industry to industry, you have to become very cognizant of these different parts.
Interesting. And are you saying that the employer should actually pay for these external accreditations, or the employee should invest in themselves to get these accreditations?
Yeah, and again, that's a really super question, because I think it's going to be a little bit of self-serve that creeps in here. The employer will give as an example in sales, there will be a sales curriculum or a sales academy that the company develops. Getting accredited in terms of your own skills and capabilities backing into that academy could indeed and starts to become more the individual. But the vehicle to practice and the vehicle to hone your skills, the company provides. So there's a little bit of a quid pro quo here that I start to see emerging. Yeah, I start to see this happening. I mean, particularly if you think in the B2B sales environment that I know well, the average tenure of a sales professional is something like 16.7 months. So an employer is going to start asking a question occasionally. Is the math right? does this work? So I think this sharing is going to be a model we see replicated as we go forward.
Yeah. Another critical component of building a great sales team is your philosophy on how to run a sales meeting. I was really intrigued by some of your perspectives when it comes to running a sales meeting. And I think a lot of professionals, especially sales professionals, take that for granted. Do you find that people have a poor outlook of what the goal of a weekly sales meeting should be?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very big generalization, but a good sales representative, a good sales professional, doesn't make a good sales coach in all occasions. And what I tend to observe is that if you've been promoted into a role, you haven't necessarily been dressed up with the right skills to handle these weekly sales meetings, which are actually really critical moments in a sales culture, sales DNA, to get things set right to succeed. And what I find is that being a individual contributor, as you are when you're an a sales professional, to being somebody that is responsible for the collective is hard. And you've not had that, you don't have that mental muscle, if you like, about how should this happen. So I tend to find that what happens with the weekly sales meeting is that the stronger account managers, the stronger sales professionals tend to dictate the agenda, tend to dictate the content of the meeting, and more worryingly, tend to dictate the regularity of the meetings. So yeah, I tend to find that if we're not careful, this important step in a sales professional's toolkit, let's call it, is being eroded because of the memory and the experiences that sales managers have had. So I very strongly advocate real discipline and structure around these meetings, because it's easy to follow a structure in a process and not be influenced by other people's behaviors.
So, Steve, let's stop the erosion. Let's give our listeners some structure. Share a couple of best practices on how they can build a productive weekly sales meeting.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these are collected over my time. So yeah, I'll give you a couple, but there are a lot more.
Okay.
Which yeah. So a couple that I find most impactful.
Yeah.
A sales meeting should be at least 70% looking forward, and focused on setting up next week for success. The bear trap here, the pitfall, is that we spend too long looking back. We certainly should be taking the learning, but that could be done outside of the weekly sales meeting. The sales meeting is to look forward and to set the next week up for success. The other place that I think is important and highly impactful is that the owner of the sales meeting is actually the sales professional and not the sales manager. This is not an environment for the sales manager to display their knowledge and wisdom in making the account manager a little in the background. This is a place where the sales professional comes with a proactive agenda, very clear on the help they require from their sales manager, so their sales manager can be used very tactically to remove blockers or to give very specific pieces of advice that will help the sales professional succeed. So this is not a meeting for the sales manager, this is a meeting for the sales professional. They would probably be the two of the most highly impactful areas.
Very interesting. Where you're saying to the manager, step down somewhat, and the professional should actually lead the meeting, and the manager should only be in the meeting to coach and provide support. Correct?
Absolutely, and I use a mantra that the job of a sales manager is to create heroes and not be one.
I love that.
You can have it.
Your job is to create heroes, not be one.
Yeah.
I really like that. How long should these weekly sales meetings be?
Yeah, so again, I think this question is important because there is a risk that they just go on. So again, I say these things should be quite snappy. I think 30 minutes is plenty for a weekly sales meeting, a one-on-one this is. But to achieve that, you've got to create the boundaries, which is where I talk about them looking forward-focused. And they should really focus on performance. Let's get real here. This is about driving performance. They're not chat shops. So that's how I would see that. And the other way here around weekly sales meetings is to keep them to that 30 minutes. People have got to get used to how they operate. So hold them the same time on the same day of the week, every week, with an agenda that's the same. Yeah? This just ensures that everybody gets used to the cadence, gets used to the ways of working, and they have, in their DNA, the agenda of these meetings.
So it's 20 minutes, and something that stood out to me. Oh, 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Okay, 30 minutes. And you need to create some boundaries. That must be hard. I would imagine that would be hard for a manager to create those boundaries for a 30-minute meeting. But that would help by a sample agenda, right?
You got it. You got it.
So talk to our listeners about a sample agenda that they could use to have a productive weekly sales meeting that basically displays some boundaries or gives some boundaries around how this meeting should be handled.
Yeah, and let's do that. Let me walk through some of those things that I would put in there. I would put in, you've already said it, get that agenda out so people know what that agenda is. Be consistent. Never longer than that 30 minutes. Be disciplined on your time. I mean, this is important. There is a risk that you can overrun. I think what you have to do is make sure that they are fun as well, right? That they're engaging, that I'm looking forward to coming to these meetings. So, this is where I talk about the interaction, making sure that the sales professional owns them. But your job as a coach is to make them a safe place for things to be discussed, a place where it is a learning environment, and a place where sales professionals feel they can come with their challenges. Otherwise, there's actually no point to have that whatsoever. It is a place where you can, in that 30 minutes, have a little bit of skill building. Once I've seen these working well, if you've identified a specific area, let me give you an example. I've been in many where a sales manager has said to one of the sales professionals, right, I notice you're going to XYZ company next week. Remember the last time when you were in this type of company, your questioning techniques were not as effective as they could be. Let's just role play, how you're going to go around your opening question. So you're setting boundaries, but you are also using them as a learning opportunity. And then I think the last one in here, I mean, many others, but the last one just to close out the question is finish strong. Have an end to the meeting. Make sure that you summarize, or the account manager specifically summarizes the go-forward actions, their timeline, and that everybody knows where they're going. So this is absolutely key, that that these weekly sales meetings end strong.
Good tips. You mentioned make it fun. How do you make a sales meeting fun?
So this is the pixie dust, right? So they're always more fun if you're above your target, above your quota.
Of course.
Yeah, they're a bit tougher if you're struggling. But actually, the reason I talk about these meetings being regular is one of the things about making heroes and not being one is you only do that if there's an element of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And a sales coach is there to help you through the more difficult times.
Mm-hmm.
And my experience, Marianne, here is that these meetings, whilst they are tough, if you have an element of trust and transparency, it doesn't have to be a meeting you're fearful of. Because actually, the premise is to help you. And if you are a sales professional that I mentioned earlier on, that is that self-learner, is curious, you are someone by definition who would be coveting these meetings because it gives you the opportunity to ask for help. And weekly you're going to get that help, right? So this is why I see these sales meetings as absolutely critical in the DNA of a sales organization, because it stops surprises. It keeps conversations open. It prevents silos or barriers between line managers and staff, because the dialogue is open. So fun maybe is a wishful word, but to keep them authentic, to keep them open, to keep them really genuine is the key.
Well, making it fun may not be always easy, but keeping them motivated is a requirement. What ideas can you share on how to motivate sales professionals? I know I've heard you talk about league tables. Briefly, could you share with our community what league tables are all about and how that can help them motivate their teams?
Yeah, it's an interesting characteristic of sales professionals. They love league tables when they are at the top. They hate league tables when they're at the bottom. But somewhere in that is the fact that they like recognition. Yeah. They like to know where they are in relation to their peers. They like to know, and they like it to be public. They like it to be known in their business that they are doing well. So whilst a sales professional will try to at times resist the transparency in league tables, the motivation is actually very, very high, because sales professionals really thrive off peer pressure. They thrive off competition. They are competitive individuals by definition. They can deal with rejection. They have quite a deep resilience. So league tables help as a bit of a release if you're doing well here. And I think the good thing about league tables is it keeps performance visible. And that's helpful not only for the sales professionals, but for other people in the business, because they start to see how the business is performing. So league tables are motivational, and I think they're a really easy and impactful way to show the good progress that sales professionals make against their quotas as they go through the sales year.
And for those that may not have heard that terminology before, a league table is... very good catch. That might be a cultural difference. But so our soccer teams here would be competing over a season, and do you call it a log? So they would have someone would be the champion at the top, and there'll be 20 in the league, and those that are performing at the highest will be at the top and against their quota, and those that are performing not so well will be lower down, and it just creates that performance ranking of an individual against their quota. Okay, all right, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that because some people may not be familiar with that terminology.
Oh, of course.
So,
yeah, well, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Sadly, we've come to the end of our episode today. This was a pleasure, Steve, but before we go, let our listeners know how they can best follow you for more sales-related information.
Well, equally, it's been a pleasure, and it went very quickly, so that's a great sign. Well, for me anyway. I hope your listeners feel the same. Yeah, you can follow me on the usual social media channels. I mean, Twitter, I'm at Steve Knapp Sales. LinkedIn, Steve Knapp Sales, and Facebook. There's a slight change here. It's Steve Knapp Sales Excellence. So I'm on all of those social media channels. You can look at me at my website as well. That's steveknappsales.com. So you can find me anywhere. I'm very accessible there.
Fabulous, Steve. Thank you again.
It's a pleasure.